I don't know about you, but when I hear Ancient Copper, I get a really strong Dungeons & Dragons feeling. What? Just me? A while back, I finished a review on the Pelican 4001 series and asked what other brands people would like to see me look at on the channel and maybe attempt to cover the whole line. Diamine is one of the brands that was recommended. Now, there are quite a few Diamine inks, so a review of the whole line may not be in the cards, but they do offer quite a few nice colors, and for the most part, I find them to be some of the better behaved budget inks on the market. So consider this part of my long walk through the budget inks of Diamine and a few other brands. Let's talk about the positives and negatives around Diamine Ancient Copper. And this time, I want to start with what could be better. Dry time is okay, but obviously it could be better. And I think maybe I honestly don't know what I was expecting, but I think just a touch better water resistance would have been nice as well. That aside though, this ink has a lot going for it. I got the bigger bottle, so we're looking at 80 ml for $15, or 5 1/3 ml per dollar. Also, with it being the bigger bottle, it's much easier to fill from this one than it is the smaller 30 ml bottles. Color-wise, I'm also starting to see why this is a bit of a community favorite, as I find I tend to prefer it more than Copper Noir, and I think the dynamics are much better from this copper offering than that of Monteverde. Which, come to think of it, since I have a bottle of both on hand, I might be doing a head-to-head here in the future. But overall, I think it's a solid ink. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and take a look. So I'm going to change it up a bit this week and start things off with the water test. The more thought I had put into it, the more I was expecting Ancient Copper to kind of act like Copper Noir. But as you can see here, we're looking at about a 2.5 or 3 out of 5 for the resistance. The ghosting layer is definitely good enough to recover what you wrote, but in a catastrophe or some other wet mess, it could end poorly. I mean, this is just something that you're going to want to keep in mind if you are considering Ancient Copper as your daily driving ink. Now, taking a look at the dry time mechanic, I should probably start off with saying that some of the more recent reviews have me spoiled when it comes to the quick dry times, so even I'm having to take myself with a grain of salt. But with that consideration in mind, we are still looking at 15 to 20 seconds for dry time on Rhodia, and about the same dry time on Tomoe. I will say, I do like the consistency on that metric, and with me being a slower writer, anything sub 20 seconds is going to be good enough for my daily needs. Speaking of writing, let's take a look at Ancient Copper on Rhodia. For the pen, I'm using my medium-nibbed Cross Calais, and I think overall, these colors make a good match for each other. Now, the first thing I'm noticing as I'm writing with this ink is that the color comes out a little more on the darker end of the dynamic range, but it does flirt with the midtones if you're writing quicker. So if you're a fan of medium nibs or wet nibs, it's a pretty safe bet that this is the color profile and dynamic profile that could be expected, at least on Rhodia. And for the user experience, it's not bad. I think the ink is well lubricated and medium wet. I mean, granted that combination does lead to the slower dry times mentioned earlier, but honestly, writing is something that I do for enjoyment, so that's a trade-off that I'm personally going to be happy with. Also, I should note, on Rhodia, I haven't seen any hard starting, skipping, or anything like that with this ink involved. Now, moving on over to Tomoe, this is an expected result. The ink is coming out darker on the page, and one would definitely have to write quicker than I normally do if you're going to get that full dynamic range. I mean, that's not a bad thing though. Getting a closer look at this ink, I do feel it has a little more character in the deeper tones on Tomoe than it does on Rhodia. I mean, I may be wrong, but when I look at the two side by side, that's definitely the feeling that I get. Now, since everyone has different writing styles and paper preferences, let's take a look at the ink blot and see the dynamic range that's on offer with Ancient Copper. I think with the right pen and paper combination, you could see the lighter tones that are on the right-hand side, but you can see that this is definitely going to be a medium shaded ink. I think those midtones convey a nice burnt orange and aren't overly saturated, so a combination where you can get that, along with a slight fade into the deeper tones on the left, that would be a really nice touch. Speaking of those deeper tones, I've had some really good amber ales that are brought back to mind when I see those deeper mids, and for the most part, I think that this is going to be the starting point for faster writers and people that do prefer finer nibs. But the main event that I see happening for most of us is here in this transition zone, where copper fades into black. I mean, I wasn't getting the sheen that we see here on the ink blot, but the medium nib came pretty close. And at the end, I found this ink to be a little bit more noir than Copper Noir was. But that's going to do it for Ancient Copper. If you liked the video, then hit that thumbs up button. Consider subscribing if you're one of the 81.5% that aren't, and if you like these reviews and want to support the channel, check out the Patreon link down below. But till next video, don't drink the ink.